Russian billionaires with assets parked around the world got very rich with Russian President Vladimir Putin in power. But they also found themselves the focus of intense international scrutiny when Russia opted to invade Ukraine. With us now on where these so-called oligarchs fit into the economic and political power structures in their home country and beyond, let's welcome, in London, UK, Bill Browder, CEO of Hermitage Capital and head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, whose forthcoming book is Freezing Order, a true story of money laundering, murder, and surviving Vladimir Putin's wrath. On Manhattan Island in New York City, Alexander Cooley, professor of political science at Columbia University and co-author of Dictators Without Borders. And in Montreal, Quebec, Christy Ironside, assistant professor of Russian history at McGill University and author of A Full Value Ruble. And as I welcome all of you to the program, it's good to see you all again. I want to set up our discussion with this quote from the Washington Post from an article of a few years back. Here we go. In modern Russia, wealthy business executives hold much less influence over the state. They own Russia, but they do not rule it. In fact, they are well aware that their own fortunes can be taken away by the state with little notice. Bill, start us off. How would you characterize the relationship between Putin's government and the oligarchs?
I would say that I wouldn't even talk about Putin's government. Vladimir Putin controls the oligarchs. They exist at his pleasure. So at any point, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, they can have their money taken away, they can be imprisoned, or they can be killed. And what I mean in terms of what they need to do in order to satisfy Vladimir Putin, the first thing is that they need to be custodians for his wealth. And so when you look at an oligarch offshore and you say they have $20 billion, that's not all theirs. 10 of it belongs to Vladimir Putin. And so these people play a very important role for Vladimir Putin, which is the custodian of his offshore wealth. And they also do whatever they're asked to do when they're asked to do it.
Christy, could you follow up on that? Because I think we need to better understand how it is that if they're holding on to so much of his money, how is it he has so much control over them rather than vice versa?
I mean, these are people who were the old political elites coming out of the Soviet Union in some ways, and they made their money because of this. They were the people who were well poised to take advantage of Russia's capitalist transition. They made their money in a lot of underhanded ways, and they know this on some level, right? So I would agree that they are able to maintain this wealth at his leisure. They are not people who, I mean, they've been hedging against this in many ways. They've got second passports and things like that, but their position is entirely dependent upon staying in the good graces of the government.
Alexander, is that also the case for those who don't even live inside Russia?
Yeah, it's especially so. So for a while, we thought that this phenomenon of seeing the oligarchs go to places like the UK, founding Londongrad, and there were arguments made that interactions with the system of law, with the stock market, with boards of directors, with philanthropic circles and giving would somehow socialize them. Somehow it would tame them, make them more liberal. What we've seen is it's the exact opposite, that this idea that somehow integration with the West would make them more Western has proven a false hope.
Bill, let's do a little history here, in as much as we're going back more than 3 decades now to the collapse of the Soviet Union. How was it that so few people, we're talking about 118 Russian billionaires, were able to amass so much wealth so quickly as the country was sort of disintegrating from what it was and turning into what it's become?
Well, Russia is has the most inequality, the most concentrated wealth of any country in the world, and that comes from this, what they called mass privatization. The original idea was in order to go from communism to capitalism, the Soviet government, I guess the Russian government right after the Soviet Union collapsed, would give away all property, quote, to the people for free. And that was the idea. But then you had these, and at the time it was a number much lower than 118. There were 22 oligarchs who basically, through very sharp elbows, very violent demeanor, and very close connections with the president at the time, Boris Yeltsin, were able to commandeer at the time about 40% of the GDP of Russia under their control. And it was all sort of total cowboy capitalism. The average Russian got nothing, literally nothing, and it was a terrible, terrible time. And the thought was, when Putin came to power, that he would somehow end this. But instead, Vladimir Putin became the biggest oligarch himself, and then made sure that a few of his friends and underlings and others joined the ranks of the oligarchs to get you to this 118 number you just quoted.
And that quote comes from Forbes magazine from an article last year, that 118 number. Bill, to follow up to you, though, do you think that the frustration of essentially this small group of people looting the treasury, if you like, at the expense of all of the other Russian citizens, do you think that in some way helped pave the way for Putin?
Well, I think for sure. So in my mind, Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world based on everything I've seen. I think that he owns half of the assets that belong to the oligarchs. And I believe that all that money that was stolen by him and by the oligarchs is effectively the money that should have been spent on the Russian people. And the longer the Russian people haven't gotten that money, and the more unfair and unequal things have gotten, the more scared Putin has become of being overthrown. And the more scared he's become of being overthrown has led to more repression and more foreign military adventures. And it's culminated with where we are right now.
All right, so Christy, he's absolutely stinking rich, but the next question is, can he actually get his hands on that money whenever he wants?
Well, right now, this is the big question, because they developed these massive foreign currency reserves, in part because they were anticipating sanctions were going to affect the economy, which, has been sanctioned since 2014. But now a lot of those assets are inaccessible to them, right? They've been frozen. Some of it is in gold, which is quite hard to convert. Some of it is in Chinese currency, and for now, China hasn't really intervened in this conflict. They have not participated in the sanctions, but they certainly can't get access to all of it. That's for sure.
All right, Alex, we just heard from Bill that it was actually under Boris Yeltsin that this sort of kleptocracy began. When Putin went into power, what changed for Russia's oligarchs at that point?
Well, the nature of the bargain was clarified. What we saw in Putin was the full deployment of state power, first with the war in Chechnya, to demonstrate that all underlings would be brought to heel, that the integrity of the state would be prized above everything. And then we saw also the confluence of higher rising commodity prices meant that the Russian government received more and more revenues. As it received more and more revenues, it became more assertive. It demanded that loyalty be maintained to the state. It brought to heel individuals like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who had tried to plow an independent pathway. And so as Russia became richer, Putin became more powerful and also had the support of what was then a growing Russian middle class that actually felt a material improvement in their circumstances and their ability to consume.
Bill, maybe you could pick up the story there, the reference to Khodorkovsky. What happens if you're an oligarch and you don't play by Putin's rules?
Well, this is the sort of classic story. So Mikhail Khodorkovsky was the richest man in Russia. This was pre-2003. He owned an oil company called Yukos. And his plan was to sort of westernize Yukos, bring on Western directors, Western transparency. And he also started to criticize Putin openly. And in retaliation, Putin arrested him on his private jet in Siberia, brought him back to Moscow, put him on trial. And when you go on trial in Russia, there's a 99.7% conviction rate. And so there's no presumption of innocence, so they just put you in a cage. And so they put him in a cage, and they allowed the television cameras to come into the courtroom and film the richest man in Russia on trial sitting in a cage. And the purpose of this wasn't just to punish Khodorkovsky, it was to send a message to every other oligarch in Russia that if you stand up to me, if you try to engage with the West in the way that he was doing, that you will end up with nothing. And so at the end, all the oligarchs, they went to him and they said, Vladimir, we definitely don't want to sit in that cage. And what else do we have to do? And he said, 50%. And not 50% for the Russian government or 50% for the presidential administration of Russia, but 50% for Vladimir Putin. And that was the deal with the devil that Vladimir Putin did with each of these people. And and he became this unbelievably wealthy man. And as a result of this wealth, he's kind of backed himself into this terrible corner, because it's not as if he can ever retire from presidency. The money that he has extorted from these people and the other crimes that he's committed means that he's got to be president. The moment he's not president, he'll go to jail, he'll lose his money, and he may even die. And so for Putin, this has created this terrible situation where he has to stay in power until the end of his natural life. And the longer he's there, the more challenges are there and the more difficult it is. And that's kind of how I think we've escalated into this unbelievable situation.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you, Bill, because, and again, I don't want you to give up sources or methods here or anything like that. However, that 50% story, how do you know that?
It's common knowledge. It's not a well-kept secret. There's lots of people in Russia who would repeat that story. And it can also be proven anecdotally by various leaks that have come out of Russia since then. So, for example, Alexei Navalny, the famous opposition activist that Putin tried to kill, who's currently in jail, he did an investigation into Putin's $1.3 billion palace on the Black Sea. And as part of his investigation, he learned that many hundreds of millions of dollars were transferred by certain oligarchs to pay for that, very much as part of like this, Putin drawing on his reserves with those oligarchs in order to fund his house. Many other stories like that. It's just a well-known situation in Russia, and anybody who's connected to the elite of Russia will have heard this many times.
Gotcha. Christy, I don't want to be ridiculously picky here, but we call these folks oligarchs. And yet, if you look up oligarchy in the dictionary, it says rule by a small elite. And we've already learned here today that these folks don't actually rule. They depend on, but they don't rule. So are we mislabeling them?
It's a really good question. I think my historian reaction to that would be to say that Russia has a long history of the service state. This idea that you have a group of nobles, a group of high-ranking people who serve the Tsar, who serve at the Tsar's leisure. And so in some ways we see oligarchy, but we also see a longer tradition of there being a small kind of group of people who have their rights and privileges. And historically with the aristocracy, it was land, but now it's wealth. So there's a longer tradition of this in Russian history.
Alex, I'm going to quote something that you wrote a few years ago in the Journal of Democracy, and then we'll come back and chat. Globalization, you wrote, enables grand corruption as well as the laundering of kleptocrats' finances and reputations. Shell companies and new forms of international investment, such as luxury real estate purchases, serve to launder the ill-gotten gains of kleptocrats. Critically, this normalization of, quote, everyday kleptocracy depends heavily on transnational professional intermediaries. Western public relations agents, lobbyists, and lawyers help to recast kleptocrats as internationally respected business people and philanthropic cosmopolitans. Are we, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here, are we in the West somewhat culpable in all of this drama that's unfolding now?
Steve, 100% we're part of this transnational network that has enabled grand kleptocracy. We typically have this idea of dividing the world up into clean countries and corrupt countries, right? And we pride ourselves at being at the top of, say, that Transparency International Anti-Corruption Index. But the truth of the matter is transnational kleptocracy requires all sorts of global service providers. If you are a kleptocrat and you have stolen money from your host country, the number one thing you want to do is make that money safe for the rainy day in which you're no longer in power or have access to power and everything can be taken away. So what do you need to do? You need to take that money and put it into an economic system that has rule of law and respects your property rights. So that means bank accounts, it means real estate, it means a whole network of service providers who are not only going to take care of your cash, but also recast you and your reputation from being that of a compromised political elite to being a respectable global philanthropist, cultural patron, university patron. And that's the other part of this reputation laundering. We in the West lead at providing these services.
Well, okay, Bill, what do you do if you're an art gallery and you need money to go along and you've got some oligarch who's prepared to write you a $50 million check? You supposed to turn it down?
Well, I think that a lot of them are rueing the day that they took those $50 million checks right now. I mean, if Pablo Escobar came along and wrote you a $50 million check, would you take it? And of course not. If the Iranian mullahs wrote you a $50 million check, would you take it? No. And so, I mean, you couldn't have described the world situation better than that. This whole enabler thing that you've just described. It's just exactly what's happened, and we have this whole class of Western enablers that have created this situation for the oligarchs, and it doesn't just corrupt our system and allow it and make us take dirty money, but it puts Putin in this very strong position vis-a-vis the West, where for the last 20 years nobody wanted to rock the boat. Everyone wanted this money to continue flowing. And as a result, when Putin did terrible things like invading Georgia and taking Crimea and shooting down passenger planes and carpet bombing Syria, nobody wanted to say anything because everyone was so happy with the status quo. Everyone wanted to just keep the system running the way it was running because so many Westerners had paved the way and legitimized these Russians to such an extent that that they just wanted it to keep on going.
Well, Christy, we haven't mentioned sports franchises, for example. There have been Russian oligarchs who have purchased soccer teams, hockey teams, professional soccer and hockey teams. Again, these leagues are always looking for incredibly rich people to help buy their franchises, improve the value of their franchises. Are they supposed to shut the door on them?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, we've seen in the last week, Roman Abramovich has said that he's going to divest from Chelsea and he's going to potentially give the money to victims of the war in Ukraine. He hasn't quite specified what he means by that yet, whether that's going to Ukrainians or also to Russians, we don't know. But yeah, they've invested their money in kind of high-profile things, right? Something like Chelsea has a huge fan following. This is a way of laundering your reputation for sure.
How do you do that, though? How do you say that you're going to try to do something sympathetic to the people in Ukraine and still at the same time stay on Putin's good side?
Yeah, this is a very big question. I'm not entirely sure how to interpret what has come out of Abramovich this week. And in fact, I was just reading something this morning trying to get some clarity, a Guardian article, trying to get some clarity from him on what he meant by it. And his team hasn't actually said, because as Alex has pointed out, there is a kind of publicity team around all of this as well. And they're in full-on damage control mode right now.
Alex, you want to follow up on that? How do you stay on Putin's good side and yet try to score those PR points by saying you're going to do well for Ukraine?
Well, I think we've gotten to the stage that, Putin doesn't really care anymore about these public statements of these oligarchs. We had Deripaska come out with a statement saying he wanted peace. The detachment of accountability of this circle of even the powerful oligarchs. We're in this. We're to the stage where this is only Vladimir Putin's war of choice right now. And so I think actually there is a little wiggle room. But that's very self-serving, right? Abramovich is making this gesture because he's been tainted with this now in the public spotlight. The same with the others. So I don't think that's particularly the dilemma. One other dimension I want to mention here, Steve, is that the oligarchs do not handle their own PR. They also outsource this to another type of enabler, reputation management companies. And they have been extremely effective, not only in promoting them, but stopping and intimidating journalists, academics, anyone who would want to investigate their networks, their origins, and their dealings. And so this is another part of this whole apparatus.
Bill, I'm wondering whether loyalty has its limits at a certain point. And by that I mean, we've seen over the last week, the U.S. government has decided to do what it's called klepto-capture. They're going after, in President Biden's words, a bit of a malapropism, but they're ill-begotten gains. Right. Has the attempt by the United States government and other institutions around the world to put the squeeze on these folks, do you think it's made any difference at all so far?
It's definitely made a difference to them and to everybody and to Putin himself. I mean, if you look at Putin's reaction to different things that have happened, it wasn't until he said that Putin then started threatening nuclear war. Why is Putin so upset about the attack on the oligarchs? Because they hold his money. And so the attack on the oligarchs is an attack on him, a specific financial attack on him. It's like if you're playing a game of Battleship, we keep on trying to hit something. We got a direct hit when we went after the oligarchs, it's very important, coming back to our original part of the conversation, that the attack on the oligarchs is not, we're hoping to get the oligarchs to overthrow him. That's never going to happen. They're so scared of him, it's not even funny. The attack on the oligarchs is to attack Putin's offshore wealth and their offshore wealth, because as his central bank reserves are frozen, as other financial flows are being dried up, he's going to look for any place he can to get money to continue this war effort. And he's going to take his money and he's going to take their money, and we shouldn't allow him to have that.
Let me follow up with Christy on something you just said there. Can you imagine a world, Christy, where the squeeze is so tight on these oligarchs that they actually turn on Putin and help in some way, shape, or form to depose him?
I tend to be rather cynical on that score, to be honest. I think, especially since they've hedged against this scenario in some ways too. They have second passports. They have rainy day plans too.
Alex, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you take Abramovich, for example, he was just awarded a Portuguese passport. So he has an EU citizenship, and he has all those rights of living in the European Union. And of course, there is some hedging that has gone on. There's also a question of family members. One of the interesting developments of this round of sanctions is that family members of the oligarchs are also being targeted, and their ability to study, to work in the West. So that's an interesting innovation and development. Whether that increases the pressure on them to a much greater degree to get them to switch sides is still an open question.
Alex, I don't mean this question to sound as naive as it might, but how does a Russian oligarch get a Portuguese passport?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It happens because most of the countries, the OECD and the West, started these actual passports for sales or residency for sales. Most of them had them and then expanded them after the great financial crisis of 2008 as a way of gaining investment. Take the UK's a scheme that came in 2008 in exchange for £2 million investment. You could get British residency for 5 years, then put yourself into a passport and citizenship queue. Well, the problem is we reviewed the data with some researchers. Between 2008 and 2013, out of the 1,600 Tier 1 golden visas that were awarded, half of them were to Chinese and Russian nationals, a quarter each. So it seems that these are being taken advantage of countries that are threatening to the West, that are rivals to the West. And this is a way for them to gain access, again, to that safety for themselves, their families, and their assets.
Bill, why would our governments do that?
Well, it's simple greed, as he said. As Alex said, they're £2 million pounds is real money, and they like this flow of money coming in. Nobody was asking any questions. Everybody was just assuming that again, with the help of these enablers, these PR firms, everyone was assuming, look, there's this nice charitable Russian man, and he's put $2 million pounds down. And in fact, you get an even faster track if you do 5 million and 10 million pounds. And so it was all like, kind of a bazaar, really. For the right amount of money, you could do almost anything. And what none of these government officials who put these programs in place realized is that they were effectively selling their national security. And so now we have a bunch of these Russians who got citizenship this way, who then started donating money to various political parties. And so, I mean, people who are in partnership with people on the sanctions list donated millions of pounds to the current government Conservative Party. And so it's kind of an absurd, easy to put together notion of how Russia has been able to infiltrate our societies and our politics, playing by our rules.
Tell me, though, that spigot has surely been turned off now, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's over, finished. I mean, everybody understands that we're facing a true existential crisis right now. And if we don't do something, if we don't continue to do things that to contain Vladimir Putin, then we're all finished.
Christy, I don't like to spend a lot of time on this program speculating about the future because the state of play changes so quickly all the time. But having said that, I've been asked by viewers numerous times, where does this all go? How does this all end? How do we get a handle on what the oligarchs are doing and have done? I'm sure you've thought of that as well. What does your crystal ball show?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a historian. I'm the worst person to ask about speculation. I look backwards in the other direction, let's put it like that. But I think we might see some of them sort of, jumping from the ship. We might see that happen. We might see some of them tightening around Putin. We might see some of them hunkering down. I think it's too soon to tell exactly what's going to happen, but I think that they're having very hard conversations amongst themselves right now.
Alex, what do you see?
I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. What we need to do is to keep publicizing the extent of these massive holdings, whether it's their real estate, whether it's their charitable donations, the kinds of passports and citizenships that they and their families own. When we know the full extent of these, then they will also be in a more vulnerable position politically.
Bill, what say you?
Well, first of all, we've only sanctioned about a dozen of the oligarchs, and as you mentioned, there's 118 of them, and so there's a lot more to be sanctioned before we're through with this. I think there's political will now to do it. I think that different governments are sort of dragging their feet because they want to make sure their files are in order. But I suspect that as we watch these horrific images on our television, and as Putin escalates this war, which he's clearly going to do, there's going to be a lot more oligarchs sanctioned. And whether they have foreign passports or not, and I think, by the way, they're going to start looking, different countries are going to start reviewing the granting of those passports as well. I know a politician in Portugal who's asking for that to happen in the case of Abramovich, and I'm sure the same thing will be happening in the case of all the golden visa passports that have been issued here. And so I imagine they're all going to sort of quickly retreat back to home base and regroup and try to figure out what to do, because that's their only true comfort zone, is being at home. I don't think any of them really have the opportunity to go away, because the foreign governments are going to be hostile towards them, and so they're all going to have to go back to Moscow and try to figure out what to do from there.
Do you think the party's finally over?
Yeah, party is definitely over. I mean, the wealth of these people has been decimated. Their reputations have been decimated. And now they're just trying to figure out how to survive, put their head down, and hope that they can somehow live through this.
I want to thank the three of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your expertise on this. Bill Browder, Christy Ironside, Alexander Cooley, it's been great having you on the air. Stay safe, everybody. And again, thanks for your contribution tonight.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.